Thanks to everybody who came out tonight. It's really great to see you here. As you may or may not be able to tell, this is the first time I've done a book event. This is the first stop on the tour, so it's really, if I'm a bundle of nerves, that's why. And I used to, when I did stand-up comedy, take my glasses off before shows, but then I went and got LASIK, which was not thinking ahead on my part. So yeah, the book was a very weird thing to write because a lot of it felt like kind of doing my own autopsy in a way. If you're unfamiliar with who I am, this basically will sound like the worst OkCupid testimony of all time, probably. I got into a 5-month on-again, off-again, mostly off-again relationship with another programmer. And when I finally got out of that, he couldn't control me anymore. He decided to sort of outsource that to the internet, and in doing so started something that later became known as Gamergate. That first night, I was out with friends, like having kind of a birthday dinner type thing, and was about to go overseas to see if I wanted to be in this new relationship I was in. He had just accepted a job in France, and you have that automatic couple-month visitor's visa being an American. I'm like, I can make games from pretty much any floor, not just my floor. So I might as well go make games from a French floor across the sea, because why not? And see if this relationship is a thing I want to do. And then my phone began buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. And it was weird. I didn't actually know what had happened yet, because it seemed like when I tried to trace it down, everyone was referencing something that had already been removed from various things, between Something Awful and Penny Arcade. Finally, several hours later, 4chan got a hold of it, and that's kind of when everything went to hell in a handbasket. Quickly, I saw probably hundreds, if not thousands, of strangers online trying to tear through every aspect of my life. I saw the post by my abusive ex, who I didn't initially think could possibly be him. I'm like, he's a vegan because he doesn't want to be cruel to animals. There's no possible way, right? And it's not like it's unheard of for exes to sort of seek revenge at the hands of the internet against people. So it's like, okay, which asshole was it that I dated? And yeah, things quickly got out of hand. I found weird MS Paint conspiracy charts made by a number of people who seem to be playing detective poop sock with my personal life. I found out that I was apparently running the entire games industry through a shadowy network of makeouts to promote a free game about depression that I would have had to go back in time to sleep with a game developer who wrote for a site that I had already written for, worked at. And that's pretty weird. The cool thing too about this is that I have depression. I've been pretty open about that. My biggest known game is about having depression. So for the first week, I kind of just felt like my life was over. The nasty part of my brain was like, oh, it finally happened. Everybody figured you out. You're exactly like, if you have any familiarity with depression, you know the sort of things that your brain tells itself. Imagine having that said back to you by thousands of people you've never met. It was bad. If I didn't have my best friend and boyfriend at the time, Alex Lifshitz, there with me through all of this, I don't know that I'd still be here today. He made me eat and drink and sleep when I couldn't, and helped me bag and tag everything for the next I don't think we were apart for more than a few hours over the course of the next year. So everything was crashing down around me. It was very clear that we couldn't just go back and chill at my place until it was time to go over to France, because my place very quickly had photos of it taken from outside my building after they found my personal information about where I lived and what my phone number was, which is commonly referred to as doxing. You can get into really fun slap fights over if there's one X or two X's in it. I think we ultimately ended up going with one X, but two X's kind of sounds more cyberpunk, so it's a little bit of a disappointment. So yeah, I started getting calls pretty much the second my phone number was discovered, after it had been distributed using my own blog, which was hooked up to my Twitter account, which then broadcasted all of basically whatever anybody wanted to email to Tumblr, because it has that nice little feature where it gives you an email address. So if you have the email address, you can post to anybody's Tumblr, and this is not a feature you can disable for some reason, or at least wasn't at the time. So soon I found my own, basically all of the stuff that I built up over the course of being a game designer for 4 years and hustled to try to make, turned against me to use to distribute my father's home address, and soon after that, links to nude photos of me. And I actually I didn't know about that one until, again, I saw the reaction before I saw the post, and it was people just screaming fake at me suddenly, and I had no idea why. It's kind of weird. The term fake news didn't exist back then, but I sort of found myself having that sort of thing distributed about me. And I used to actually answer the phone calls, and anything that wasn't screaming obscenities immediately, they didn't really know what to do with me at all. They'd be like, "Hey, is this Zoe Quinn?" I'd be like, "Yeah, you called me. You pressed the. Do you just hit random buttons and hope?" Like, I'd be like, "Oh, you know your phone number's on the internet, right?" Yeah, I'm aware. And then they wouldn't know what to do. So it's weird being at the center of something that is equal parts terrifying and asinine. Because it's like, it just goes back and forth between, this is so ridiculous, it's hilarious, and then you're like, oh, it's ruining my life, though. And obviously it wasn't just me. As I mentioned, Detective Poopsock branched out his conspiracy theory to many other people, some of whom I've never met, that I was accused of sleeping with. Some of whom I know and had to watch all of this happen to by proxy. A good friend of mine, Phil Fish, was one of the first people to stand up for me, and did so when it was very inconvenient and too many members of the press were doing this both sides crap that you might see familiar in the mainstream media about other groups right now. And he's like, yeah, fine, make her famous. Come on, guys, let's really rallied for me. And that night, he found his website hacked. His Dropbox had gotten hacked. His personal information, including his social security number and that of his employees and his wife, who had been desperately trying to hide from the internet, because Phil's no stranger to harassment himself, were quickly distributed. And it's really hard to face somebody when you feel like you're responsible for what happened to them on such a gigantic scale. This continued throughout the industry, targeting primarily people who are not straight, white, cisgendered men, not just women, as too many pieces reported. It was definitely not just women. There was a Sikh man who the Paris attacks bombings got blamed on. Like, race was a gigantic component of this. Whether or not someone was trans was a gigantic component of this. The person I was accused of sleeping with later, as my ex continued to stoke the fires, a non-binary person of color was hit probably harder than any of the men. And that a lot of people I've never met and am still meeting became targeted. So without spending too much time into what, you can just imagine that for the last 3 years. And, you know, this is everything from just this garden variety harassment, which unfortunately I feel like pretty much everybody who lives online has experienced some degree of, to threats of abuse, threats of death, pictures of my dad's house sent to me, calls to my father, who is this enormous biker dude, which is like, good luck with that, guys. He still has a really good attitude about everything. He's like, you know what, Zoe? I know it's either a bill collector or you're one of them Gamergaters, if they use my full name, because everyone just calls him Mikey. So about after 7 or so months of this, when I still was unable to go home after trying to seek successfully getting a restraining order against my ex who started all this and continued to stoke the fires, again, for months, I had found that pretty much everything that was ostensibly in place to be able to help me had completely and utterly failed me or made things worse. The restraining order that I got when I was extremely nervous and had to fly back to Massachusetts in order to get under total secrecy because a First Amendment attorney turned juice salesman who thinks that his semen is literally magic had spent more than 5 figures on hiring a private detective to stalk me and my boyfriend, which sounds like it's from space when I say it, but is 100% true. And that guy actually went on to be an influential figure in Pizzagate, too, which is extra fun. Because, you know, there wasn't just, this is like games, pizza, what's next, like Beergate, like just taking all the good stuff and adding gates to it. Yeah, so I had to fly back under total secrecy. get the restraining order. Went up to the judge, and he's like, he looked through this stack of documentation that took me, a friend, since again, I could not go back home, I ran a good friend's printer completely out of ink to just get kind of the greatest hits together. And he like, was like looking at it, and I remember his eyes like going like, boo, after about 2 pages. And then he's like, all right, what can I do to help you here? I'm like, well, my ex-boyfriend started this. He's talking about posting a sequel. I really just need this to stop. I really need him to not give more information about me to these hate groups that are, wanting to ruin my life. And I was especially afraid of the sequel because I had not told anybody this over the course of Gamergate, but 2 weeks after we broke up, I found out I was pregnant. And he wanted me to keep it on condition that I quit making games because it was enabling my bad behavior. And obviously I did not, as the Antichrist is in office and not in my house. So he took what I said, and instead of what I thought would happen, which is translate into a nice little legalese version of it, which would actually be useful to me, he just wrote basically word for word what I said, which meant that the First Amendment, I feel like there's no phrase that will summon more insufferable people to you suddenly online than free speech. So they all joined in with people who had already become, what we're now calling the alt-right, but really have just been garden variety racist since the start of time. That roped into one shambling mass of people that were scary and hated me. And I was afraid he was going to add the people who bomb abortion clinics to that list. The restraining order, the night he was served, he immediately went on a Holocaust deniers YouTube channel, because of course it was a YouTube channel, and outed who I was dating's full name and future employer. And we lost basically our light at the end of the tunnel of going to France and not having to couch surf with friends indefinitely. Every time he violated the restraining order, I would have to go back to Boston, hide, report to a judge, do a show cause hearing where you have to try to show less than 50% skepticism what happened, to a judge that said ultimately after, I don't even know how many hearings anymore. One he did bring a date to, which was weird. Not the judge, my ex. The judge brought a date. I mean, I'm not going to judge that. Fuck. I swear to God, that was not an intentional dad joke. There'll be plenty of those, don't worry. And ultimately, this judge looked over what I had given him, and he said he's not issuing the criminal charges in the case of harassment, because if this is what the internet is like, I should just go offline. And I'm like, Your Honor, I'm an independent game developer. There's no offline version of that. What you're doing is asking me to give up my career. And as he was leaving the room, he looked back and said, you're a smart young kid, find a new career. So in January, I did. Kind of. I mean, I'm back on my bullshit again, you guys, if you follow my game making career again. I just couldn't stay away. But I started a grassroots organization called Crash Override Network, because the one thing that above all else that became painfully apparent while I was going through the worst of it was that I was not the only person. I got so many people reaching out and saying, hey, I feel like you're the only one who understands what happened to me. Here's this, and it was down to almost a showcase of internet lore coming through my inbox, people whose stories I had heard and was familiar with. And hearing the other side of it and being like, oh yeah, I guess I read a lot of disinformation about you on the web. I had no idea things got so bad. I had no idea things got like this, because the first thing you do when you're targeted usually is hide, because oh my God, why wouldn't you? And why would you want to open yourself up to more? Why would you want to put more information about yourself when everything about you is being gone over and examined for ways to yell at you? And so I'm a game designer because I think in systems. And I know a system when I see one. And what became very painfully apparent to me was that there was a system at work here. That all of the ways I'd been failed, whether it was law enforcement, and even then, I was not failed in the way that a lot of people of color are by far. The fact that they even listen to me at all is vastly different from any of the people of color or the trans women or the sex workers that I've worked with, just so we're clear about that. Because one of the biggest solutions people offer is the police, but I'll get into that in a bit. the tech companies were a joke. You often, the original post that my ex hosted up on WordPress is still up to this day, despite there ultimately having been issued criminal harassment charges in that case, because they didn't consider it harassment. And I talked to their head of security policy about like a year later, because I had a client who was dealing with revenge porn and I needed that contact. And he said to my face, yeah, it's a shame we can't do anything about that. It's not technically harassment. I'm like, really? Because the district attorney of Massachusetts thinks it is. And he's like, oh, anyway. So you can have a harassment case so bad it ends up in Wikipedia, and that's not a TOS violation of WordPress, just FYI. So, and again, super not common. So the one thing that did seem to help was other people who had been there, people who knew how to secure my stuff, people who, and a lot of it was learned by fucking up, like, finding out exactly how insecure my password of Funky Fresh was and how dumb I was for using it across so many different accounts. Because I'm like, I'm an independent game developer that, you'd get like hipster points for referencing in a conversation. Who's going to try to hack my like modcloth.com account that I bought shoes on once 3 years ago? But you'd be surprised. I was, certainly. So we rolled all of this information, got a bunch of other people who had been through this sort of thing, and created this grassroots movement. We ended up, the key points of failure that we saw was law enforcement was a burning trash fire, tech was a burning trash fire, and the government, we were scared to death someone would swat a senator, and then, hey, guess what's gone? Privacy. So we decided to try to figure out what kind of approach to take to this. The biggest thing we were doing was helping other people that would come in with their casework specifically in like their instance. And the biggest thing we wanted to do was make sure that our network couldn't be used against somebody else, because so many of the solutions that we turned to made things worse for us or could be used to screw someone over. Like, the only reason I went to the police in the first place, outside of a lot of people kind of pressuring me into it and saying like other people were invested and needed the win and I had the best chance, which is a whole other thing, was that they had brigaded the IRS tax reporting or tax fraud reporting line to try to get me audited. And I'm like, well, I guess I have to deal with cops now. I'll make a paper trail. So we tried to figure out how to do this. And the biggest thing was centering the needs and consent of the person affected. Because one of the biggest things that happens first when you're in a shitstorm like this is you feel like you've completely lost control. Like, it's just out there. There's a mob tearing through everything about you, everything about everyone about you, and anything tangentially related to, down to, I'm trying to think of the most ridiculous thing that they thought mattered, and I think it was an offhand internet forum reference I made to somebody 2 years prior to when shit actually went down. This became fuel for a rumor that I made a trans teenager whose name or any details they didn't know killed themselves and was bragging about it. Again, citation needed on all of that, as they... or like there was another rando on a forum that said I killed a man. And that's a whole thing that I had to answer journalists questions about like 2 months ago. And so we didn't want people who came to us to feel like they lost even more control. So it's like, there are a number of different responses to being targeted by something like this, and they're all valid. If you want to fuck off and never have to deal with these people again, that is a valid want. You don't have to sit there and get in the trenches and fight. And, I saw entirely too many people being like, oh, you're so brave for staying. And the reverse of that is like that other people aren't if they leave. And it's like, no, nobody deserves to be treated like this. If you are in games and you're like, actually, I deserve to be treated better than this and this isn't worth it, that's not cowardice. That's taking care of yourself. Then there's the people who want to like dig their heels in and fight back. And Lord knows that, I obviously was that. Fell into that camp because I've taught girls in second grade how to make their first games. And if I turned the second that shit got hard, I feel like I would have been letting them do the fighting for me. And no good mentor I felt like I would have been letting them down by my own standards. Not that, again, your own standards are usually not what you judge other people by. So caveat there. So centering what the person wanted, coming up with an action plan, and undergoing things like learning how to do psychological first aid and knowing that small, tangible tasks do a lot for a lot of people. What? Thanks for buying a book. I'm gonna spend your money on something really gay. Like really gay. Are you still here? I'm sorry, what was that? Corruption? I'm sorry, I don't speak meme. You gotta, that's a lie, I speak meme. Fuck off! That's okay, you don't have to swear at him, he's welcome here. Did he give me money to just get humiliated? I have some friends who do that for a living. It sounds pretty sweet, to be honest. I mean, shit makes me feel like I'm in the wrong career. Anyway.
Was stand-up comedy a good prep for the aftermath of this?
I mean, I would say yes to a certain extent because, like, oh, I mean, like, what are you going to say to me that someone hasn't in the last 3 years? You know? I mean, we can just go straight into Q&A. Like, I'm like, no. I'm not, this isn't me being snarky. I'm, like, super down to do that because I'm just rambling at this point. Like, I talk about Crush Over It.
Nothing about your organization.
I'm taking this mic off. No, it's cool. Like, that actually diffused a lot of tension. He did me a solid because I didn't know what the hell to do up here, to be honest. Because, I mean, you have in your hands a book where I ramble on a lot. So it's like, oh God, more rambling. That's exactly what people want, right? No, so...
It sounds like you were in a bit of a bind, Ding.
Yeah, somebody follows me on Twitter. That's great. So yeah, we had the advocacy component, so we'd go and talk to varying people, and basically anytime anyone would listen to me, I'm like, yes, I will tell you how like most of what you're doing is really not great. So, you know, that ranged from talking to people who worked in domestic violence units who are like, we don't really know what to tell people who come to us when their abusers are like following them onto the internet, which they usually do. Do you have any tips for how they can hide themselves? So stuff like that was our main point of interaction with law enforcement outside of if we thought swatting was an imminent threat, like their home address had been leaked and it seemed like that was likely, we'd go and, you know, be like, we'd be willing to talk to the cops on your behalf because we found we had decent success going. And the thing with talking about cops is like, you just can't mention the internet at all or else it's like their eyes glaze over. And, you know, it's a good way for me to use my white privilege to sort of intercede on the behalf of other people and that are willing and want that. So it's like, oh yeah, you're going to get a prank call for something happening at this address. Please don't just bust in with guns. That would be bad. And we know that you have to check it out and like being very differential because cops get mad when you're not. And like sort of doing that heavy lifting for the person. Or if it was like, hey, this is happening to me on whatever social network or whatever email, whatever platform. If it wasn't somebody I've already, like a company we'd already developed a relationship for, which was mainly me going and yelling at people until someone would talk to me, I would go and yell at more people till someone would talk to me and being like, hey, we should do this like two-way thing where you tell us what your terms of service mean to you. And then we will come to you with cases of that we know that you want to get rid of. So we'll help you do your job basically for free because none of these people have ever paid me or anybody. So then a client would come to us if they already had report numbers, we'd take them through the escalation channel and be like, look at this. We know this is a thing bad. We talked about thing bad. Please do thing. And with varying degrees of success, as you'll see me very tiredly explain in the book. That worked sometimes. Too frequently we heard, well, you know, this neo-Nazi also tweeted what he had about lunch once, so I don't know that he counts as an abusive user, and we don't want to like, or my standby favorite, but what if the president blocks somebody? What about that? Isn't that bad? It's like, obviously this is in a pre-Trump era, and like, you would not imagine the shit that I heard from Silicon. Well, you probably could imagine the shit that I heard from Silicon Valley millionaires. So, with varying success, we'd come back and basically, you know, after doing sort of a threat analysis, some of it was preventative too. Like some people would be like, "Hey, I'm a trans writer and I'm about to express an opinion. What can I do to get ahead of this?" And those are the easiest cases because it's like, oh, thank God, it's so much easier to do this now than it is to try to turn off a hose in the rain. So we would walk them through locking down, and a lot of times it was just talking, you know, because like so many of us, it was like nobody understood. You know, even with me, it was like when things were going bad with me, immediately everybody aside from two people, Elizabeth Sambat, love her to death, and Alex Lipschitz, my partner, were like, just wait for it to pass. Just keep your head down. Don't say anything about it. Don't feed the trolls. And that is bullshit. That doesn't work anyway. Like Kathy Sierra is another developer who had the audacity to say that there weren't a lot of women at a conference 10 years ago, and her daughters have been getting rape threats as long as they've been alive. And she did go offline. It's actually cool to see her kind of come back a little bit now, because she's like one of the nicest people I think I've ever met. But these things rarely happen to anybody but really nice people, sadly. So anyway, we would do that sort of advocacy. We'd also go in and try to inform policy with, again, anybody who would listen to us. So it'd be like, hey, so we're actually on the ground seeing how these policies manifest and talking to a lot of like leaders from other marginalized communities and saying like, hey, what you need, what is not happening, how is this working, how is this not working? Things like real name policies. I'm doing gigantic air quotes for people in the back, where, you know, which disproportionately hurts trans people. People have changed their name because they're hiding from somebody, or sex workers where it's not safe to use your actual name, or, you know, any variety of that. It doesn't even curb harassment, honestly. Like, because my biggest harassers, I knew their names. They marketed this. They made money off of it, you know? So being able to say stuff like that, but sadly, just because you're talking to them doesn't mean they're listening. And ultimately, as I was writing this book, the tone of the second half, which was I always wanted to do this symmetrical first half, second half thing. First half being, here are all the institutional issues, and using my lens, my experience as a lens to start the conversation and to put a face on it. But the second half being like, and here's what I tried to do from within fixing the system. And everything is broken, and it's so much worse. And most of these people trade access for silence, so anybody working within the system has a hard time actually saying whether or not anything is happening. And then, you know, companies and various people get to say, hey, look, we're talking with activists, so clearly we're fixing the problem. And then nothing changes. So there are screenshots that I should probably not have leaked anywhere in this book between me and Twitter as a trusted security partner, because sometimes you have to burn a bridge while you're standing on it so they know you're not fucking around. And ultimately, there's like a ton of really practical advice that we would give to clients that I would just give to random people in the book too, like several chapters dealing with that, suggestions on what to do from bystanders, a lot of interviews with people from other demographics, people who have been through this before me. Like I talk a lot with the women who did Your Slip is Showing, that unmasked a lot of people that were coming after Black feminist Twitter as like fake accounts from Black women like trying to end Father's Day and that whole bullshit, and like actually like give them unedited, give them space to actually talk about that, because Lord knows like that was left out of the reporting on what happened to me for the most part too. And you know, this stuff goes back, you can trace the lineage from the White House through so many other people back to before me, back like basically as long as the internet's been alive, because there's very little difference between how people feel online and offline. And that's kind of the thing with the information age, is now we can hear from people we'd never hear from otherwise. Now we know these things are happening, and we might not know what to do about it yet. And ultimately, it ends on a plea for letting me go back to being a fucking game developer, because I can't solve this alone. Crash could never solve this alone. You know, as gloom and doom as stuff can be, the internet at the end of the day is just people. And, you know, we can be the solution as much as we are the problem. And I feel, depending on the day, alternately hopeful and not hopeful about that. Especially, again, really hard to write this book while the election was happening. And I had to go back and change a lot of things from this is going to happen to, oh, this happened. And then just having to call it at a certain point. You know, you can't keep going. I couldn't keep up with it. So if it's not painfully clear, like it has been to marginalized people who've been writing about this better and longer than I ever have, you know, we are all we have out here, and we have to take care of each other, because nobody in power is going to do it for us. And, you know, the only reason I wrote this book, it was, like, I could have written something that was just like trying to write about the weird tangle of what happened to me that was so freaking bizarre, that Adam Baldwin got involved, that fucking David Draymond, the lead singer of Disturbed, ruined my breakfast once. Like, that's its own thing, right? Like, if nothing else, I can go back to stand up now, and Lord knows I have material. But what happened isn't as interesting to me as what do we do about it. And, I'm still an engineer at heart. So if I can avoid having to do the same thing over and over and over and over again and can automate it, I do. And a book is a handy way of automating having to have the same conversations over and over. And it's my hope that, honestly, like, with people more informed, because education really is the first step, especially to an audience that doesn't follow me being back on my bullshit on Twitter, because I can't really blame them for not wanting to go through like a cajillion different Overwatch puns to anything actually useful to anyone else. I need to reach I wanted to reach an audience that might be the person that says, hey, just go offline or don't feed the trolls or any of that. And I'm really hoping that this book can at least accomplish some of that, or make the next people, because there always are more people in situations like this, there's no shortage of us, more savvy about what to do if everything goes wrong. So yeah, that's more or less the book. There are a lot. Hello. What am I doing now? Oh God, that's existential.
No, you said that you want to go back to being an artist and game developer. So what are you doing now? I'm glad my dad didn't come to this reading. So I'm working on a game called Pounded in the Butt by the handsome living video game manifestation of the life and works of Dr. Chuck Tingle. I think that might be the first time I've said the full title without fucking up one of the words and having to restart. So yeah, nailed it. I'm also obviously writing, which is cool. I wish my first book was about something more fun and less Nazi-filled. But here we are anyway. And that's one thing that to keep in mind I think this is true for anyone marginalized, but also for people who have gone through any sort of traumatic experience that has gotten attention, is being defined by the shittiest things that happen to you suck. Especially when it overshadows what you've done about it or who you are or what you've made before all of that. And it shouldn't be the only thing about anybody that we know. And I say so pretty explicitly in the book, not for my sake, because I'm lucky enough that I got to say all this. I'm lucky to have the mic in my hand and to be able to yell at people that come in to yell at me. But not everybody gets that chance. And, gotta hold the door for the next people, right? So yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to live a life around all this, and making really goofy games about loving yourself and other people as hard as I possibly can, because God knows I need a bit of light in my life, and I think a lot of us do, especially since it's a very queer game. I don't think there's no straight people in my game, and I'm not going to. I don't know.
So I think we've officially transitioned into Q&A.
Hey!
Right? Hey! So, hey,
Sorry, I
everyone.
rambled. That was very unpolished.
No, it's okay. I think we
I'm apologizing
transitioned
to these lovely people.
right during that episode. So, hi, I'm Nicholas. You remember me from the intro. I have a mic. I think we have time for about 3 to 4 more questions. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
Yeah, and just to make sure
I don't know what I'm doing. You guys make
the best questions possible. If you catch my drift, I'm gonna let Zoe point, and I'm gonna walk the mic to you, and then you'll have the floor.
You were here first.
Right here.
Yeah.
There you go. I have, I guess, more of a comment than a question. I have a million questions, but
Me too.
Yeah. So I'll just try and hurry through it. First of all, Piper at Bappy Paws Bitch says hi.
Yeah,
cool to see you, everything like that. And the other thing that I've been thinking about saying is I know you were in the thick of it, but it was so weird being this observer from I don't know, maybe the first week after that manifesto dropped. And seeing you in moments of you had a live stream where you were doing resin castings of evolution stones.
Oh my God, that was so long ago. I forgot I ever live streamed that.
And those mundane moments of just being a regular person, sharing what you're doing in your day, to Zoe Quinn spoke at the UN. Here's the headlines.
Yeah.
And I just want to say there are all these different things that make me think about emphasizing this sense of normalcy while the world is falling apart. and that like thinking about that has helped me get through a lot of the stuff that's happening now, like the things that I don't have control over, and just trying to like be a regular person as much as possible from day to day. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that presence you've had in my life, and no doubt a lot of other people's.
Thank you. That means a lot. And yeah, it's like when things suck, it's like you have to fight to just, have a second to breathe, right? To allow yourself to be a person for 5 seconds and not just, this othered symbol of something. And it doesn't matter if it's like you personally being attacked or if it's like, a group that you belong to being attacked, which always is like this weird kind of shared trauma to just see happen. Like you have to allow yourself to be like, no, you know what? Today I'm going to be fucking boring. I'm going to be boring as hell. I'm going to make time and space and allow being boring sometimes is self-care in a weird way. Just being like, no, I'm a person today. I'm not anything but some boring person. Yes.
Is Crash Override doing any training?
So I'm working towards making more training available, like basically packets so that other people can do it. I need to get the hell out, to be honest. The crisis hotline's been down for a bit as I work to restructure it with people who actually know what the fuck they're doing. Cause like I'm just a fucking game developer. I should not be in charge of anybody's mental health. As much crisis training and stuff as I can do, I really just need to pass it off to people that can sustainably do this, because it's become clear a while ago, I get to pick one. I don't get to do both. And because it's not fair to the people I work with creatively to have to basically stop in the middle of things constantly to go deal with like Nazis, when I'm already going to have to do that from the game developer side. And it's not fair to people coming to us for help for me to have split attention like that and to take on as much as I have as one person. Or like a small volunteer group. So I'm working with people who've set up sustainable hotlines to make that its own thing, as well as like I want to create training materials for other people who run hotlines, because the thing is like all of this stuff is all intersectional. It's all pieces of life, right? None of this happens in a vacuum. So people who run suicide prevention hotlines should know about this stuff. So that way, because we would refer people to the trans lifeline, which was normally like really, really good, but like there was 1 or 2 people that are like, oh, well, you should just not be online as much. And it's like, shit, no, that's not the right answer. Don't do that right now. Or like the National Suicide Hotline did that 100% of the time. So we like never referred people there. And, like we would say this thing is available, but we would still, be like, it's got some problems, please. Like, what do you even do in that situation? And I don't know, so I need to hand this off to someone else. And that's part of, writing a book is like, hey, here you go. Here's a lot of it. I can't keep doing it. And, I need other people to pick up where I'm leaving off, more or less. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you just wrote a whole book on a lot of this, so I don't want to put too much pressure on you by asking you to condense it into a single answer. But for those of us who are lucky enough or have enough privilege to not be directly involved in these kinds of incidents, but can still sort of see it happening, is there any kind of key thing that you think is most helpful for people to do in that sort of situation to kind of either help the person being targeted or to stop it from spreading, and things we can ask our friends to do? I know obviously a lot of this is on the platform, but what would you say would be the best way for people to help when they see this kind of thing happening?
It depends on if you know the person or not, because you shouldn't do like one of the things that like bothers me the most is like when someone jumps into my mentions and screams at somebody who's telling me to die. It's like, cool, now I have to read that original thing constantly. You're not helping. But other people want to see that show of support. So everybody's different. And if you don't know them, then I would say, I would say pay attention to whatever they're saying. The biggest thing you can do is center the needs of the person who's being targeted. The second biggest thing is when you see somebody in your life, it doesn't like people got to have hard conversations with the people in your life. I hear from friends all the time, like, hey, yeah, I have this like really shitty relative, but that's just the way they are. No, it's too late for that shit. Things have gotten too bad. And that doesn't just apply to online abuse at all. We have to have those hard conversations, and we have to be our brother's keeper in that sense. We have to like go out of our way and do that. Another big thing is just when it comes to the internet is being careful about what you're sharing, because a lot of this stuff works on disinformation. I mean, it's very hard to like go through, and I know it sounds like a drag, like actually verify shit before you spread it, but you also can just not spread it if you're not sure. It's pretty simple way around that. Even though, you know, I feel like it's really easy to get caught up in like trying to dunk on the thing of the day or, you know, whatever it is. But so just like be more careful. Don't just immediately go for that impulse, because I feel like a lot of social media sort of incentivizes getting caught up in something, which by all means can be used for enormous good, you know, like, or just silly frivolous things like arguing over if boneless wings are technically chicken wings or not. They're not, by the way. They're nuggets. That's a nugget. But I'm the one with the microphone, so ha-ha! So yeah, just be more careful, basically. And honestly, just check, like, resilience is such a huge part of this. Checking in on someone you know is having a hard time, and it doesn't even have to be the person affected. If a person, like if you see some shit like what happened tonight with the repeal of my brain is, thank you. My brain is soup. I've been answering too many questions all day. Then, and you have a friend who's like a child of an immigrant or an immigrant, just be like, hey, feel free to not respond to this because I don't want you to feel like you have to. But I'm just thinking of you and just wanted to check in and say, hey, and see how you're doing. Like stuff like that, and getting into the habit of like looking after the people around you can do so much for just, you know, it's not just this side of, no, I'm not going to do an embarrassing video game metaphor. God damn it, everybody. So there's that, everybody wants to be DPS, right? But we need tanks and support classes too.
Yeah, support rep.
Yeah, support mains! You know, God, I'm so embarrassed at myself right now, so we should go to another question. Thank you. Tank me on this embarrassment.
Very short.
Sure.
We're honored to be in your presence, and we salute you.
No, thank you. That was,
All right.
yeah, you weren't kidding.
I have the mic. Okay, cool. So
you get to decide what if boneless chicken wings are wings or not.
I'm a vegan. I don't really care.
Oh, fair enough. Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
No, but so I kind of came to the internet late. The most I would ever do and for most of my life is just shop online. I kind of came to Gamergate after people were done talking about it, just reading up on this, and kind of made me a little scared to start speaking on the internet. I'm not really on social media. What are some first steps you think somebody who has no experience dealing with online chat rooms or whatnot should take? What kind of baby steps would someone like me take there?
Anytime you sign up for something, if it asks, just see what the privacy and settings available to you even are. If it has two-factor authentication, which is a thing that happens when you like usually enter your phone number and it'll text you a code, so it's not just your password, but it's also a code that you enter. Super good for any account that might have sensitive information. Try to Google yourself really aggressively and see what is already out there about you. It's very easy for your information to end up on sites like whitepages.com and Spokeo, these third-party information brokers that will have your home address and phone number and all of that stuff without you ever consenting to that. And that's like a totally unregulated area of law right now, is these third-party information brokers. And anything that you wouldn't want written in the sky, pull down, because like you're at a good point where it's like you get to control going forward. You don't have this like history of like teenage fanfic and shit that I did. Not that fanfic is bad, like come on. But still, like in certain contexts, anybody can read something a million ways when they're looking for garbage on you, right? So be careful about what you share. Be very cognizant of things like privacy settings on Facebook. You know, you're starting from the ground up, so just think about what you're putting out there and think about if you want that written in the sky or not. And, you know, it varies from platform to platform. Stuff like Twitter is public facing. Facebook, you can actually control a lot better and limit it to people that will have the context or away from the public, and that's helpful.
So just like get a good lay of the land before you say a thing, because it's way harder to pull stuff down than it is to put stuff up. Oh, also, if you're going to have any website at all, and if you're buying a domain name, opt in for the who is privacy, because all of those records are public. So if you like type in, it doesn't make it very apparently clear that all that stuff will be public, but you know, it'll put like, if you say my address is the same as my billing address or whatever on that, that stuff will be in a publicly searchable database. And domain privacy usually costs a little bit more, but it will keep you out of the whois database. And it'll make sure that if someone goes to find your information by typing that in, they just see like privacy registrar, blah, 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 without any of your info. So please do that, or just enter a fake address. I like to enter the address of the ICANN, the people who actually do stuff like that sometimes, because I'm a bastard, but that's just me. They don't check.
So we have time for just a couple more questions, and then we'll move on to the signing.
Okay, let's go with you two.
Okay.
Hi, Zoe. So I'm a journalist, and I write for the Daily Dot, so I do a lot of viral work. Like, you know, like so-and-so said a dumb thing on Twitter, and now they're in trouble with the internet. And one thing I found a lot of the writing I do is that sometimes it's hard to like see the person behind the story is like a person with like feelings and emotions and a human being. And I want to make sure that even if someone did something dumb, you know, as journalists, we're fair. So what do you think is one thing that journalists, a lot of times, like when it comes to reporting about harassment or like viral tweets or anything like that, what's one thing we can do to make sure that we're like not instigating harassment, but rather just doing accountable like newsworthy reporting?
I don't know if you're going to like this answer. I'm sorry. Stop reporting on stupid tweets that don't actually affect anybody. Like, is that, like, at the very least, stop embedding them, because that's a one-click button for that person to get screamed at. I really think that that sort of reporting is tricky, because like sometimes it is newsworthy, and if you're writing about like maybe the harassment around it, or if it's a public figure, I think I would say like keep in mind that a lot of people that end up in that boat are private figures. They're just random people that are not ready for that and are not ready for that kind of exposure. And you have to be willing to take on some share of responsibility if that person becomes targeted, especially if they're a marginalized person, because there are entire communities of people looking for people to go after. And you might, if it's just like some throwaway comment, put that person in their sights. And, you know, if it really is like discourse, capital D discourse is happening around something, write about the bigger thing. You can still talk about the issues and say everything you would want to say, rather than making it about that specific person. Like if somebody said something shitty and racist and people are having discourse about it, talk about that. Talk about the actual ideas, and talk about, you know, what the point is, like why that thing was such a thing, rather than, hey, look at this guy. Because like, hey, look at this guy's stuff is like, what is even really the point of that? Like, we're not really addressing why that sort of thing happens. We're not really addressing the other underlying systemic issues here. So especially if it's like, hey, look at this guy harassing that other person. That other person might not want that attention. And that happened a lot to me, is like, oh, cool, look at all of these think pieces about Milo Yiannopoulos. I'm really glad everybody's raising his profile. It's really super dope to see all of these dapper Nazi pieces and shit like that. Like, that did not help. That just, you can't shame somebody who's proud of what they're saying. You know, then you're just doing free advertising for them. So yeah, that's my convoluted answer. And I'm sorry, like I said, I'm sorry if that seems combative. It's not meant to be. It's just like, it's hard to see that turn out good when it's like about putting attention on one specific person when that person is not already a public figure or somebody, instead of talking about why there's an issue or why people are talking about it. You know what I mean?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm more nervous than you. Don't worry about it.
I just want to know if you had any advice for people that are trying to get into the games industry, because I feel that we are partly responsible for like our audience, I guess, because the alt-right spawned from Gamergate to a certain bit, and that last guy probably didn't get what he was saying from books.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't really agree that the alt-right came from Gamergate. I feel like the Gamergate came from the sentiment and garbage that the same it's all symptoms of these underlying hatred of progressives, of quote unquote others, like anyone who doesn't look like a 1950s sitcom dad. So like,
I think not just game developers, but we all kind of have a responsibility to try and set a good example for our audience, you know, if we're out there building one. You know, not all of us are. Plenty of people are just like, I just want to be a barista. I don't want to deal with any of this shit. And that's fine. You know, it shouldn't be necessarily the heavy lifting of people who really just don't want a platform and don't participate in these sorts of things to suddenly gain a platform and seek that just to say those things. Like that's a totally different thing. I guess my advice is the best thing you can do is listen to other people, you know, and I mean, you're doing that now, so thank you. But you know, keep an open door. Talk to people that aren't like you. That's like the best thing you can do, and not in a way that's like making more work for them. Just have a more diverse circle of people that you network with. You know, if you see someone new too, like go out of your way and be like, hey, I'm so-and-so, how are you doing? Tell me about what you're working on. That, even just like making other people who feel like outsiders feel like they're part of something. And, you know, community is a thing you do. It's not a noun. It's a way you treat people. So like working to build a community and that sense of community and being good to others is huge. You know, and yeah, just everything else about like just general advice for not accidentally spreading misinformation or, you know, enabling bad behavior and whatnot applies there as well. So yeah, I think that's an okay answer. I don't know. Thank you.
I like that answer.
Okay.
And on that note, thank you for coming and thank you for speaking.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I rambled so much. Well, then you will love the book.